Dus het gesprek met Hamza zal plaatsvinden in het Engels. En hallo Hamza. En we zullen dus ook voor vertaling, of Hanne Kraaij zal voor vertaling zorgen. Als jullie vragen hebben, kunnen jullie die ook in de chat stellen. En dan proberen wij die zo goed mogelijk te beantwoorden, Hamza in elk geval. And I would also like to welcome the audience in English, of course, not leaving out anybody. Sorry, Hamza, for the Dutch, but that's part of the welcoming event. We're really delighted to have you here tonight with us because it's a special week.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored and glad that the film is now in Belgium. So amazing.
Yeah, so are we. COVID-19 did hinder us twice, both in April and now. It was only released, as you know, last week. And we did see that there was a lot of interest in the film. And that's why we think it's so important to have this discussion tonight. Also for you to tell us more about the film, the making of the film, but especially what is happening now in Syria. And also, of course, the action that is needed for Syria. But maybe to go back to the film, I did want to congratulate both you and Waad, and I think a lot of the people who we've seen, because as you stress, it's not a victory because the situation in Syria is terrible, but it is a victory in a certain sense because you did reach out to so many people and you managed to pierce that Syria fatigue. So I wanted to start maybe with the film and especially the dress that Waad was wearing on the night of the Oscar nominations, where she really pointed out, we dare to dream and we will not regret dignity. Can you explain us a bit more about that dress and of course the words?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you very much. And as you've said, it's like when we discuss a little bit, it's we are just like a happy family that managed to get out all, we're surviving, then we're now in a safe country living there. So it looks kind of like a success story or a victory, but the message that we want to deliver is not like that and that's it. That's not the end of the story, because the Syrian people are still struggling, the refugees all over the world are still struggling. So it's just like a victory that we managed to get the story out, and we'll keep telling the story to reach out more and more people. On the dress with the Oscar, we had our expectations that we might not win. So and the film is not just like a piece of art, so it was kind of also an act of resilience, an act of activism, a scream about what happened in Aleppo. So we always wanted to take advantage of any events that we were at to deliver this message. And it started when we were in Cannes Film Festival, when we hold signs, stop bombing hospitals. We did again in a festival or two. On the Oscar, it was a little bit tricky. So Waad has this idea, if they're not gonna allow to hold clipboards, then she's gonna write something on the dress. And we all had brainstormings about the ideas, what could be written, and then she came with this sentence that basically will just kind of a shortcut of an 8 years of now 9 years of the revolution since it started, that whatever happened to Syria, with all the losses, yes, we are displaced out of our country, and through all the terror and horror we faced, and the brutality that the regime handled the peaceful demonstrations, we will never regret that. We'll never regret the dignity that we start to feel since 2011. So yes, we dare, just really simple sentence, but it's literally just a shortcut of an 8-9 years. We dare to dream, and we'll never regret dignity. And yeah, it's really delivered the message at the Oscars.
Yes, that did. And what made you dream? How did it start for you? We've seen part of the story, of course, in Forsama, but it would be nice maybe to hear a bit more from you. Like, what did this revolution arouse in terms of dreams for you?
So I will speak about myself, but also kind of most of my generation. So basically like the people who were between maybe like 22 to 26, that like the university, the undergraduate like years. So it started with the Arab Spring, with like Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and we were all like seeing this and watching that on the news. And unfortunately, like the Middle East kind of like lived the same circumstances about dictatorship, and like there is no democracy, there is no freedom. And so like we were like wondering how those people really like dared to dream, how they dared to stand against the dictatorship. And personally speaking, and a lot of people were thinking that like there is no way that this could start in Syria, and there is no way people are going to stand against the regime. And then it just started like snowball, when like few children in Dar'a wrote on the wall that your turn is next, doctor, referring to Bashar al-Assad. And then the regime like managed to find out who's those children that wrote that on the wall, arrest them, torture them, and insult their families. Protests start to start in Dar'a, then in Damascus, in Homs, and a little bit also in Aleppo. And I couldn't dare to participate in the protests, like in the first couple of months. But then once you really like scream for once in a street, when I like joined the first protest, it's really like a moment that really changed you completely. And you like the first time that literally you feel like your opinion or your act matters, feel like you like your voice is heard. So like, yes, we were like shouting in the streets and screaming, but it's the first time that I could ever like hear my voice or the people's voice. And then it just like grew up like snowball. As expected, the regime faced that with a lot of brutalities. Like there are a lot of people, some of them my friends, has been arrested since 2011, 9 years. That were arrested by the regime. And then it's all continued with like the people start to like carry weapons to face this brutality, to defend themselves. Then they start to organize, and then it became like an armed conflict. Some areas was announced a non-government area, where like that's when we moved from West Aleppo to East Aleppo, because it was announced a non-government area in July 2012. And then the regime faced that with more brutality, with like mortars and aircraft and shelling and the barrel bombs. And then the Russian interfered with more brutality. Some areas were sieged and people were displaced. We're talking now in northwest Syria, about 3 million people living there, about 1 million of them living in camps. And talking about more than 6 million out of sight of Syria as like refugees all over the place. Like I guess like everyone has met a Syrian during this like last couple of years. So like we're literally like all over the globe. And yeah, we're still just dreaming of change, dreaming of accountability to happen one day, and we're still kind of do all the activities to hopefully like to achieve that one day.
Yeah, I would like you to talk about Idlib and the situation on the ground maybe afterwards, but I want to insist a little bit on the dreams and also your voice. You said that you managed to raise your voice for the first time. At the same time, your voices were heard and they were also quelled again with the violence of the regime, but also because the world did not listen that much to Syrians, or not at all. And Waad also insists very much, we don't want your tears, but we want action. So you always continue to use your voice throughout the siege of Aleppo. We see you also in Forsama doing interviews, and now you're still doing that. what did that mean for you, like using your voice, and how do you do that also today after the success of Oussama?
So at the time when we were in Aleppo, like till the moment, like my phone, I guess I have like over 200 like journalist phone numbers, because through all at the time, like especially in 2016 during the siege, like maybe I was doing like 5 to 6 interviews every day with like journalism from different countries. And my only thought that like people should know what's going on. And if we would like, if we were killed, which was like the most potentially that we will be killed, at least like will not die in like silently, will not like our death will not just like be a number where like the regime gonna say like few doctors in Aleppo were killed and then that's it. Sorry, not the regime, like the WHO statements. And the so we just like my point was just to make noise as much as we can. I've done like so many other like activities with like helping with different like organizations like Crisis Action. Wrote like a message to President Obama, which they replied that they are doing their best to help the situation, but they were like worried about the election more. And like a message to Prime Minister Merkel. We've done an open petition that was signed by more than 800,000 people to help the people in East Aleppo. And unfortunately, I was a bit like shocked by the lack of action from all the governments, from the Security Council, from even like the UN, the WHO, and we were like the solution was the only solution was to displace us out of the city, which is like one of the first rights for the human rights is like for a person to live in his own country or city. Mm-hmm. And frankly speaking, after that, I was shocked and I was kind of like lost hope and faith in humanity, that like everyone is worried about their own business. Everyone is worried about their own matters. No one cares anymore. We're just like numbers. I was shocked, like when even like after we like went out of Aleppo, most of the interviews that I've done after that, like journalists were asking me like about ISIS, and like in Aleppo we had ISIS only for 6 months, and that was in 2014. And like I had some questions like, were ISIS fighters displaced with you? Were you like in buses with ISIS fighters? And I was like, this is only what you cared about. You've not cared about 300,000 people that you were seized. You haven't cared about the like 9 hospitals that were targeted. You're just asking about like ISIS fighters that weren't there in the city. And so I went quiet for a couple of years, but then after the film and after the reaction of the people that we've seen from the film, and like in each screening, I had like most of the people were just saying like, we really didn't know that was happening. And we're really sorry that we didn't know that first. And we're really sorry that our government didn't do anything. So I got back like my faith in humanity and other people, that hopefully they can put pressure on their representatives and on their MPs and on their governments to do something, because the Syrian crisis is still happening. The dictatorship regime is still there. They're still using like brutal weapons against civilians. They are still shelling civilians' neighborhoods. There are still so many refugees inside Syria. Russia are still doing vetoes against humanitarian corridor and humanitarian aid crossing to those like refugees, and it's still like the disaster is still there.
Yeah, there are a couple of threads now that I would like to pick up on. You've mentioned the WHO a couple of times, so we will definitely also treat that issue, because I think it's a very important one also with COVID. But there was one question in the meantime by the audience that nicely fits what you were just describing, the way how the conflict is described in the West very much as on the one hand you have the Assad regime, on the other hand you have ISIS, and the Assad regime is being aided and abetted by Russia. But then that person also says, well, the West didn't do that much also to stop this. So what you were just also saying, like, not only has there not been any action, I think referring, of course, to intervention, but also there has been complete passivity. So I don't know if you would want to comment on this lack of action.
So, like, I guess the Syrian crisis has affected like like everyone, each like all the countries all over the earth, and the problem is like the lack of action that we've seen from governments, like from the UK, from the US, from like the others, France, Belgium, Germany, and they were like always stating that we don't want to interfere in another Iraq, and we don't want like to interfere in other countries like kind of business or interest. On the same time that allowed Russia to interfere with the massive power they've got. So like it's just like different situation from Iraq. Doing no action after the first chemical attack that happened in 2013, which allowed to have then several chemical attacks in Syria. If the governments have done anything against that chemical attack in 2013, ISIS wasn't even there. There will be not an environment for ISIS to grow. There was like a big long research about the regime involvement in releasing several leaders of ISIS out of the regime prisons to the non-government controlled area, which then they started like the jihadist militias. It's like so like the refugees crisis won't happen. The changing in a lot of political voting in the Western countries because of being afraid from ISIS, from the refugees and all of that won't happen if there was a real action in 2012 or 2013 against the dictatorship regime that is killing the Syrian people.
Mm-hmm. You also referred to WHO. I would like to maybe address this now. There are a couple of problematic terms that the United Nations agencies, more generally, not only the World Health Organization, use with regard to Syria. One is sieges, but more problematically, of course, is the evacuation of Aleppo. How do you firstly deal with these terms, which of course undermine a lot of what you're living and misrepresented, but also how do you go about the UN's operations within Syria? So then I'm referring, of course, to WHO and maybe also the World Food Organization, which I think a lot of Syrians were more critical about than the Nobel Prize Committee.
So it's a little bit like tricky because like the word like still till the moment the governments or like phrase it like they're still kind of like playing by the rules, like through the Security Council, the UN, then WHO, and all of that. Like they need to have a resolution for cross-border aid from Turkey, the non-government control area. So like kind of they're still playing according to the rules, by the rules, with the like while the other players, the other stakeholders, the Syrian regime and the Russian, has completely gone like over all the crossing like all the red lines, crossing all the rules, and so it's not like like making any sense. With the WHO, they and the UN, they had, for example, about the hospitals protection, they had like a deconfliction mechanism about hospitals sharing their location with the WHO, and then WHO will share it, or the UN gonna share it with the conflict parties, which are mainly the Russian. And in spite, like all of those, most of those hospitals were then targeted by the Russian aircrafts, still like the statements from the WHO and the UN using a very weak sentences, they're still using like the passive voice that us as Syrians consider very like misleading. When you say hospitals were targeted in Syria, and then the Western audience will just understand that, oh, it's like a terrible fighting and like they're bombing each other's hospitals, while it's clearly who's bombing the hospitals, it's clearly who's targeting the civilians. After we were displaced out of Aleppo, and I will just open it's in the UNHCR Twitter, they just posted a tweet stating, I'll say it like literally, after years of darkness, city of Aleppo is lit at night. We hope that Syrians find light at the end of the tunnel finally. Support Syria. And that's very undignifying us as Syrians. Like, I lost my friends in this city by the attack of the regime. I was displaced, thrown out of my city by the regime and the Russian. 9 of 10 hospitals were completely destroyed in the city. And people, like more than 30,000 people, were displaced from their own hometown. And then you just tweet that, oh, the city all is lit again. And the regime was, by the way, cutting the electricity from the east part of Aleppo. So west part of Aleppo had electricity, but there was no electricity in the east part of Aleppo, because this is one of the ways that the regime were facing the civilians. And then the UNHCR just celebrating, oh, finally the city is lit again. Another tweet from the UN Refugee Agency, it seemed like UNHCR, but different Twitter account. Life is slowly returning to the destroyed city of Aleppo. For the full story, check out our Instagram today. Like, what you are celebrating displacing people. You are celebrating destroying the city all over there, like the citizens. And then now you're celebrating, oh, now we're bringing life back to the city. It's same as about the terms when they're not using the evacuation instead of displacement. It's like, the heroes.
Just sorry to stop you here, Hamza, because I think there's a lot of new information maybe for the audience. So we have the deconfliction mechanism that I think is a new issue. I think for a couple of people, I'm not sure, but it is quite difficult to get your head around it. UNHCR, I think, was perfectly clear for everybody. But maybe just give a little bit of more background. What do they mean with the evacuation, and maybe also the green buses, just to give us the full picture of what happened then?
So
film, of course, but still, it's important.
Yeah. So basically, the regime tactics has started in the non-government control area since 2013 is to siege the area. After sieging the area, targeting the health facilities, and then forcing basically the people to just try to find a location, like a way out, because there is no other services, there is no food, there is no water, there is no electricity, and there is no healthcare services. By that, they call it the displacement. The displacement happens by the regime sending public green buses. So it's like in London, we have here the red bus, which is very famous. So in Syria, the public buses are green. So they were sending the green buses to those areas to evacuate the people without the presence of the UN or any third party to monitor this evacuation. So even though the evacuated people were under the mercy of the regime and Iranian forces and the Russian. So that happened in Homs, that happened in Homs countryside, that happened in Aleppo, in Damascus countryside, and in Daraa, in several locations. That was the tactics. Unfortunately, the UN were kind of advocating for that solution. So when we were in Aleppo, and you've seen in the film, I was communicating with WHO, with the UN, they were just putting on the table that the resolution that they have, the solution they have is the displacement of the people. And they call it, the term is evacuation, that you are in danger now and you are the superheroes gonna evacuate you. And it doesn't make sense. And that was I was just struggling to communicate with them that, please, this shouldn't be your resolution. Don't say that the UN solution is to displace people from their city. You should say that your solution is that you demand to enter the humanitarian aid to the city, demand to let the medications and to enter the city. And then when the Russian refused that, you don't have any other solution but to evacuate people.
Yeah.
But don't make it like it's the humanitarian solution is to like evacuate people, which like its reality is displacing them. And also they're putting pressure on us that by not accepting that solution, basically we are refusing the UN and the WHO solution by not accepting the medical evacuation, that they don't have any criteria for it. So when they WHO first time communicate with me, because I was the manager of the last hospital that was also elected by the 30 medical doctors in Aleppo that were in this during the siege to be the spokesman on their behalf. So when they communicated with me about that, and they said like we need to do a medical evacuation, I said like, okay, great. I have like in the ICU we have so many cases that really need to be evacuated. So what's the criteria for that evacuation? And they had no criteria at all. I was shocked by that. That like we don't care. Just let's set a date and then give us the names now and the medical conditions. And after a week we're gonna evacuate the people. And I was saying, but like there is no criteria. I need like to determine who needs really an evacuation, who doesn't, and based on that, like we'll do the evacuation. But they didn't care. They just want to do a medical evacuation out of the sieged area, and they were putting pressure that if we didn't accept that, then the people who are sieged are refusing the UN and the WHO solutions. And it was just like a big pressure. One of the things the WHO offered in beginning of December, so after like 5 months of the siege of Aleppo, when 9 hospitals were destroyed, they called me and they said they have a solution to protect the hospital. It was an Egyptian doctor, I guess his name is Ahmad. He said that we have a solution to protect the hospital, and that he literally said like we were communicating with the Russian, and they said that they don't know the exact location of the hospital. And based on that, the hospital might be accidentally targeted. So we want you to share the coordinates of the hospital with us, give us the exact location. So we share it with the Russian, and they promise that they were not like they're not going to attack it. I was really shocked. I was really angry. But the only thing that I told him that, how long have you been working in like on Syria? Are you really new here? So you had no idea about the context and what's going on. 9 of 10 hospitals were destroyed by the Russian aircrafts. And this is like the last hope of the city. And you just like want to deliver it to the Russian. He said, this is the only solution we have. And then I asked him, if the hospital was targeted after that, if I give you now the location and the hospital was targeted after a couple of years, would the WHO statement clearly said that the Russian has targeted the hospital? And he said, no, we can't do that. Because they always use the passive voice. They just said the hospital was destroyed. And he said, like, you know that we can't do that, and don't push us. Like he said, like, you're pushing us too much. And like, I'm a doctor in a siege area, pushing the WHO too much, but I just want them to dignify me if I was killed, and just stating who killed me. And it was just too much for their humanitarian response.
I can imagine that it's so surreal to describe this and to live through this. And it's also surreal, I think, for a lot of citizens here. Having seen the documentary also myself with friends, a lot of people didn't grasp the reality before seeing the film. I think afterwards they did. We talked about the deconfliction mechanism, but there was also a question from the audience insisting once more, like, why on earth would the regime and Russia, in the full knowledge that the world is aware of this? We had the New York Times Candy sent reportage. There's so much information, so there's a full knowledge of the world that this is happening. So why do they insist on this? I mean, you've already described it, but I think it's a kind of outcry of a person here who doesn't understand why you would want to bomb civilian infrastructure.
So it's basically like it's hard to understand it, or say like from kind of like Western perspective, because there are so many things that are here taken for granted. So like human rights, dignity, freedom of speech. Here is kind of like, it's just taken by granted here. You don't think about it. While in dictatorships, the dictator, like they think about it as its own country, its own land, its own farm, and with just workers and people living on this area. Like in the official books, education books, they called it Al-Assad Syria. Like we were told that this Syria is called Al-Assad's Syria. So, and like they're not shy of that. Like we were, like that was in the education, primary school books. And based on that, like when the people stand against that regime, they will just want to, like the regime then want to give an example to anyone who dare to stand against him, that this is what happens to you, that there is no possibility to live without without the dictatorship control. And how to make that difficult or impossible? Basically by siege, cutting the food supplies, cutting the water electricity supplies, cutting the humanitarian aid, cutting medications, destroying hospitals. Without healthcare, there is no way that like life can continue. Like you have like children, women, elderlies, injured, all of that. So like they need healthcare. And that's the tactic. I'm not sure about what I'm going to say now, but a doctor in 2012, like before the start of the massive attacks on hospitals and health facilities, he told me that it's kind of like a Russian military tactic. And in the Second World War, that they had like the golden statement in the Russian army was, killing a German doctor equals killing, like it's more like worth more than killing 10 soldiers. So targeting the healthcare providers of the another army is more important. So he told me this, and he said like just prepare for the worst, because the Syrian regime is using the same Russian military school, and they will start to target like all the healthcare workers and all the hospitals.
And this is also why you take issue with the term civil war. A lot of Syrians take issue with it. And often I think it's not understood, because people see a civil war. People see a civil war with regional, international dimensions. So it might be nice for you to elaborate on why this is painful for you to hear this term.
I guess it's like, it's mainly because of how we want the message to be delivered. So when anyone hear the term of a civil, if I heard the term of civil war in Congo, I would thought, oh, there's like people in Congo are killing each other, and it's not my business. My country shouldn't involve in that. Like why we should bother if they want like to kill each other. While the reality of the Syrian crisis or the Syrian conflict, that it started with a peaceful demonstration against the dictatorship. And if anyone was following the news about Syria, in 2011, 2012, all the reports was about peaceful demonstration against dictatorship. And then we were all distracted by jihadis, militias, ISIS, and all of that, that it's not like now in 2020, there is no more news about like those civilians that are living, like dreaming of freedom, dreaming of dignity, and they are not under the regime control, and they're still like want to for justice now to happen and accountability, and like it's not in the news anymore. So we feel like kind of like phrasing it as a civil war will let people like kind of move people back away of it. And in fact, it's like civil war when really like Syrians killing each other, but like with the interfering of Russia, Iranians, we have Hezbollah from like Lebanon militia interfering in Syria. There's Afghanis fighters with the regime. So it's just like another world war, not a civil war.
Another question, I'm taking the questions from the audience because it's nice, I think, to interweave them with the discussion rather than have them all at the end. Well, our conversation was supposed to last an hour, and it's really nice to see how much you have to tell us. So I would like to take another question, which is, well, there was at least the illusion created that there are elections, that al-Assad pretends, Bashar al-Assad, to be elected democratically. So how do you explain this? How do you go about this political system, which is a farce in the end?
So like in Syria, the election that we have, I actually need to use the Google Translate to give you the word. So it's a referendum, not an election. So we have also like kind of a House of Parliament, but we know that it's just like puppets for the regime. So like the referendum, basically, like the House of Parliament will put a name of a person that are like they suggest to be a president, and then the Syrian people will do a referendum about that person. Through all the years, so Hafez al-Assad, the father of Bashar al-Assad, and then Bashar al-Assad, that they ruled Syria for 50 years, they always score 99.9%. So like basically all Syrian people vote for them. But I guess I would say even God doesn't get like that. that record, of the prophets didn't get those records, if you believe, if anyone was a believer. So there is no way that a person could get this 99.9 approval from everyone that living in this state. But so it just basically we have also constitution that state that this is the rules, but we know that it just kind of a military country. It's ruled by the police agencies and by one family that kept ruling Syria for 50 years. And at the moment now, they are stating that because Bashar al-Assad's son, his name is Hafez, I think his
father.
Yeah, but on the father name, he named his son based on the father. They are now in the media, in the Syrian media, they start kind of to polish him that he's the next president, that he's prepared to be the next president, and he's only 18 now. And so after 10 years, no doubt that we'll have Hafez al-Assad. So it will be Hafez, Bashar, Hafez, and then waiting for the other Bashar to come.
Yeah. That's why they call it a Jumlukiye, like a kingdom and a presidential system in one. Would you maybe also want to elaborate once more on the refugee question? I mean, you touched very briefly on it, but there was one question from a person who's very concerned by refugees, who lives in Norway and who is Belgian, who talks a lot with friends from Syria, and asks them what would it take for you to return to be able to go back home? I think, of course, it's what you just explained touches very much on that question. But when would it be possible for you to return to Aleppo?
So yeah, first thing that I want to really highlight that I'm happy that I'm now, for example, I spoke for myself because I'm a refugee. So I'm glad now that I'm with my family in a safe place. Yes, I can't meet my other, my brother and sister that are now in Turkey. I need a visa to go there. It's not very easy to get it, especially with also COVID now situation. So yes, I'm happy that I'm living safely. I'm not happy about not being in able to visit my family or to go back to my home. We tried our best. We almost died to stay in our country. So we risked everything to stay in Aleppo. But the only solution that the world has given us is either be killed or get out of the country. So I just wanted to highlight that no one dreams to become a refugee. If you ask all the refugees all over the countries that when they were 18 years old or 15, and what are your future dreams, no one gonna say, oh, I wish I become a refugee in the UK. No one gonna say that. So each one has their own dreams. They had their own land. They had their own house, their own dreams, their dreams for their children. But that was all taken away from us. And the only solution is to seek a better life, a safe life in another country. And I'll go back to Syria, or the people gonna go back to Syria if they knew that they're not going to be arrested, if they knew that they're not going to be killed under torture. And that, like, when they know that, when they see any light of accountability start to happen in Syria, that will lead them to those like 6 to 7 million people to go back. Not all of them will go back, because people, like, there are some people, for example, in Germany or in Belgium, that have been living there for 8 years. I think they might have even the nationality now. So like, they started their new life. So it's not also kind of fair to just tell them, like, now we're going to take all of that from you and you need to go to start a new life back again in your country. But it's just like the basics is, at least, like, I know that I'm safe in my country and I'll never leave it.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is also a good time to talk about Idlib, because how can one return to a country, of course, where there's still so much devastation going on? So we heard now in the news that there's a 20-fold rise in COVID-19 in Idlib, but of course there's much more going on, which concerns people much more physically, of course, than COVID-19, but it's still an element. So you are in touch, of course, with people on the ground, and how do you see the situation evolving in the near future in Idlib?
So it's
the last province, sorry, that is still in the hands of the opposition.
Yeah. So it's still very, like, difficult, because, as I've said, like, for like in last year, there was 4 humanitarian corridors that allow aids, which includes also like medical aids, to cross from Turkey to those areas which are north of Syria.
Yeah.
The Russian and the Chinese has done 2 vetoes on that. So the first one was a year ago, and they only allowed 2 corridors to still remaining. 6 months ago, they also done another veto on that, and they are now allowing only 1 humanitarian corridor to for aids to cross to those areas. So it's very difficult situation. If the Russian and Chinese has done another veto, I think they vote on that like every 6 months now. So if they have done another veto on that, that means the UN agencies can't work from Turkey to Syria. Basically, those 3 million people living in the area will not have any source of support from the UN agencies. The people living in very crowded area regarding COVID, so in camps, I've said, like, there are more than 1 million people living in camps in northwest Syria. So like, basically, like, self-isolating is impossible. The economic situation is very, very fragile and very difficult. So you can't just, like, ask people to quarantine for a few days, or you can't, like, ask people just to stay home and basically, like, stay in their tents, because their tents are the new home for them. So like, it's just very, very fragile situation. And like, not only about, like, there are healthcare providers, yes, the like, it's very limited, like, regarding human resources, but like the other component of health, which, like, regarding the food, regarding shelter, regarding hygiene, there are some camps that don't have even water. And it's just very difficult. Like, camps in Greece don't have water. Like, there are some camps in Greece that they don't have water. So imagine camps in northwest Syria under the threat of being shelled at any moment. So the situation is very difficult, like, on so many aspects.
Mm-hmm. You already referred to the humanitarian aid and also the manipulation by by the regime. And to go back to the WHO, the World Health Organization, there was one participant who had another question, like, how come that this is even possible, that the WHO plays into the cards of the regime, and is it not possible to take action against these malpractices?
I really don't know. I have no answer for that. I'm now studying public health, doing a master in public health. Hopefully, I can, like, join WHO and see, like, what the hell is going on with you, because, like, the lack of action is unbelievable. And like, even like on statements wise, like, that's what most shocked me. Like, I don't want, like, WHO, I don't know, like, the head of WHO to move, like, travel to Aleppo and stay with us and, like, risk his or her life, but at least state about the reality of what happens. But there's so many like political aspects about like they can't state anything against a member of the UN, which is Russia and Syria, and all of that. So it's very I don't know, like unclear. And I guess that the pressure from people will lead them to do action. One of the things that like in every meeting I'm stating, even when I meet them, that you're not doing enough, you're not doing the right things. And when they see that the people also knows the reality that you're not doing enough, hopefully that might change some of the policies and their procedures.
Yeah, of course, one argument that they always kind of present to dismiss criticism, more generally the UN, I think also in other conflicts, if we don't adhere to the rules imposed by the regime in this case, then we won't have access to the country. That is also an argument that they use very much and that you also dismantled. But I guess it's important to also bring up their kind of defense of these practices where they condone or even have to play according to the game that the regime imposes. For example, working through Damascus or not allowing cross-border assistance apart from that one humanitarian access point. So I think it's important also to present, I think, that their arguments, even if we don't agree with them.
Yeah, of course. Like it just like, as I said, like it's very, very hard, but it's not making sense, like, playing under the rules while like it's like other like the other conflict parties are not doing that. And like like very last shocking, for example, thing that Russia and China have been elected to the UN Human Rights Council for the next 3 years. So like it's just like, I don't know, like it's unbelievable world we're living in.
Absolutely. Another question that came up, and I think that comes up very often in conversations we have about Syria, if this was a revolution that started by students mainly and civil society activists, how do you explain the surge of IS, or where did IS come from then, if it was a peaceful revolution?
Yeah, so it's a very long topic.
Yes.
Yeah, so how to start actually? So it started 2011, it was completely peaceful demonstrations. The regime was always claiming and stating that there are jihadis since early 2011, that there are some jihadis that are fighting the government, that are killing policemen. And we know that it wasn't the case. So like, because, like, why we know that? Because we were participating in those demonstrations. So like when we were like demonstrating against the regime in Aleppo, and we then at night we hear the news, they would say like there was few terrorists try to cut the roads and they shoot against policemen, and like this is what happened in Aleppo that day while we were in that street chanting against the regime, and like it was completely peaceful. After that, there are several jihadis that came from Iraq, that came from Belgium, that came from France, from Germany, from the US, because it then just became a non-government control area. There is nothing like to rule there. It was easy to buy gun in those areas. Where the guns come from, like I don't know, but I guess like it like the government's intelligence will know that or participate in that in a way or another. And then there are several jihadis that were led, like they were like released from the regime prisons in 2012 and 2013, and then they moved to the non-government control area. And I like they will, of course, like if they are jihadis in a place that there is no rules, that there are very easy to get guns, they will start a militia there. And then it started. So ISIS at the beginning, it was in Iraq. So there was ISIS in Iraq, and they call like it was ISIS. It's the Islamic States in Iraq and Syria. And before 2013, it was called the Islamic State in Iraq. So it was in Iraq before that. And then they crossed the border, some of them, and started the ISIS in mid 2013, and it's like the rest of the world know the stories because it was all over the news.
Indeed. We do have two more questions. I think the questions keep coming in, so I hope you still have some energy left, but I think there's a couple of really nice ones. One, maybe that I'll keep for the end. One is that we have a new government in Belgium, and what would be your key asks for this new government to do in terms of action for Syria?
So I guess the main ask that the Belgian people, they ask the government, like, what are their plans towards Syria, from the point of humanitarian aid to Northwest Syria, from the point of accountability against all the parties or everyone that has committed any war crime, starting from even refugees, people living now in Belgium, that if they have committed any war crime, don't protect any war criminals. We know that there are so many people from the Syrian regime army that they have committed war crimes and then they fled to Europe. There are several cases in Germany at the moment against some of them. And so the Western governments, Belgium new government, should kind of have a plan toward that. So I guess two things about humanitarian aids and accountability, and really crossing any line to have any relationships back again with the current Syrian government, with the dictatorship of Al-Assad, because a lot of right-wing parties were stating that it's not our problem. We're stating that Al-Assad are keeping the jihadis in Syria, and we don't want them to flee out of Syria, so we need to have relation back with them. It's not our problem what's going on in Syria because it's a civil war. So it's an elected government, and it's okay to have relationship with this government. So the Belgian people should tell their government that it's not allowed, and it's not under our watch. You can't do that while all those war crimes are committed by this government. We can't just let that go and forget about it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you are referring to universal jurisdiction, which is gaining much more traction now in Europe, and which is an interesting development after all these years of passivity with regard to stopping the impunity. Two more questions. One is a purely informative one, but a very important one, because this is a war which is waged very much on the ground against the Syrian people, but it's also very much a disinformation campaign. So having good access to information is important. And one person was asking how to find good up-to-date information generally with regard to Syria, but also with regards to initiatives also by civil society organizations. Where can we find that online?
So what we are trying to do, we started a campaign called Action for Sama in order to take advantage of the well receiving of the film, and then have some action points that people can do. And also we've done release several more information stories about the situation in Syria. We're trying we're now kind of seeking some fund to make that more have more strategic approach for the next year, and to build more on that. There are the Syrian campaign, the Syria campaign, that are doing amazing job about Syria and the situation in Syria. I guess the New York Times, the Guardian, they're doing amazing pieces about the situation in Syria, about accountability, about the latest one of the latest New York Times investigations piece was about the attacks on hospitals, and they have very clear evidence about the Russian communication to attack the hospitals. So yeah, it's difficult to find clear, in COVID now, for example. It's difficult to know what's real and what and what's not, because of the massive amount of the fake news. But I guess hearing the stories from the Syrian, from the people who live the situation is the best thing.
Yeah, and maybe overstepping my mandate as a moderator, but I would like to also recommend a couple of Syrian organizations, like the Syrian Organization for Justice and Accountability, CJAC, I think is also doing excellent work. There are a couple of organizations maybe that we can share on the Facebook page of MOVE, because there are a couple of resources, like one is a book by Wendy Perlman on We Crossed the Bridge and It Trembled, very much on civil society organizations. Because you are right, it's hard to know what is happening, Hamza. On the other hand, I think there are a couple of facts which are really factual and well documented, and it's important to keep insisting on this, because we know that people get confused by the complications with regard to the situation and the complexity, but on the other hand, there is information that people can benefit from.
Just add to that, like, as you say, like there is like some facts no one can argue. Like if we have at the moment like 6 million people as refugees, they are like the government are controlling more than 90% of the area of Syria, or like 80%. Those 6 million people are not going back. That means that this government is not like right. I'll just take it that simple. So like fact that there is a dictatorship in Syria, that's a fact. So even if we had ISIS, there were jihadis, whatever, that doesn't change the fact that it's a dictatorship. They killed their own people. They're still ruling. They have used several times chemical weapons against civilians. That's just like facts.
Yeah, it's important. We keep insisting on that in the current climate, I think. To end really now, of course, it may be a predictable question, but I think a very important one. How is Sama doing now? And also, how do you explain the situation to Sama and Taima? You have 2 children now to explain the situation to, but first of all, how is Sama doing?
So yeah, Sama is doing well. She's almost 5 now. She's going to reception, school. She started to have like this weird British accent, which is bugging me and Maud a lot. And
that's hard to deal with.
Yeah. But like, yeah, she's teasing Taima, her little sister. She's now 3 years and a half. She's teasing her a lot that like it's like when she show her like a poster of the film, because like it's Suad carrying Sama, and she tells her like, look, it's for Sama, not for Taima. So it's difficult to handle that, and I don't know how to explain it. I just like, also before we wind up immediately, I really want to answer this question about who did do more harm to Syria and the Syrian people, the regime.
Okay, I'm happy that you wanted to, because I thought you had addressed it already, but good.
But it's just like the regime has done more harm in, like, you can't compare the numbers. Like 90% of the death is responsible by the regime, while ISIS is like less than 10%. I'll have it now like open about like attacks on healthcare in Syria. So the total attacks on medical facilities in Syria, and I'll give the exact number, is 583 attacks. The Syrian government forces is responsible for 297. The Syrian government or Russian forces responsible for 228 attacks. ISIS responsible for 10. So 10 out of 583 is ISIS responsibility, while the Syrian government and the Russian are responsible of more than 500 of them. So the numbers are really shocking. Unfortunately, you just hear that hospitals in Syria are bombed. People in Syria are killed, and you'll just assume that it's ISIS.
Yes, it's important to add that, I think. There was one last remark also by Mark Bonen, the director of MOVE, that while he was honored to have this discussion, but also to follow the journey for Sama and also your family, because we've been able to follow it for the last couple of months. And we hope, I think I'm speaking on behalf of everybody, that you will stay healthy, and also that you will keep up the action for Sama and broader for Syria with such tremendous, I think, humanity and really touching people, where I think a lot of people fail to touch people because it's so hard to break to that wall sometimes of indifference. I think that Syria, the Free Syria, has a lot of ambassadors, but that you are among the most important ambassadors for the time being, but you're not alone. You always insist on that. And we know that there's many Hamzas and Waats and other activists who keep fighting for that dignity and freedom.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Hamza, for your generous answers and enthusiasm. I don't know if you want to wrap up with a final message here.
Just like, yes, like, I guess like your last words were amazing. Like, just thank you all very much. And we're not like unique cases in Syria. You have so many refugees in Belgium. Really hear their stories. Each one of them has so many stories. They were just like just moved there. They didn't like just take a plane, come to Belgium, start a new life. They've lost so many people. They have struggled a lot. They have struggled to stay in their country that where they built their dreams in, and then they were forced to be displaced. Please keep like your Syria, keep Syria in your conversations. Ask your representatives what their plan on Syria. Tell them like, we've watched a film. Situation is bad. The like people like are displaced. There are no humanitarian aids, and like there are so many war crimes has committed. What's your plan about that? What's your plan about the Syrian government? Are you willing to have a relationship with them or not? Like, just tell them that you know the truth, and hopefully one day accountability gonna happen.
Thank you. I would also like to thank the audience, because it's nice to have quite a big crowd tonight. And I would also like to invite those who haven't seen For Sama yet to watch it online, because it's streaming on different streaming platforms, and also to spread the word about this very important documentary. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all very much.
Hamza.
Pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.